Out of the Police Audit Committee for April 3rd. It's at now 7:01. We've got a fairly decent agenda. The first is the minutes to approve, which we go back about 5.5 months at our last meeting. I asked Allison a couple of weeks ago to send out the minutes as were approved at that point to all the members, and I would look for a motion to approve the minutes of September 19th, the minutes that Allison has sent to you. Do I have a
Mr.
motion?
Chair, just a little bit of discussion on that, please. So in regards to the September 19th minutes, I sent over some edits, and a lot of those edits weren't allowed to be included, which it's my understanding that you're precluding some of those edits from being allowed into the minutes. Some edits that specifically, go on to talk about some negative things that you said, essentially. So I'm asking the committee for unanimous consent to allow the minutes that I've prepared and sent over to Ms. Knapp, that everyone's had the chance to review at this point, to be entered into the record for September 19th and October 18th.
I would think if you were going to do this, you'd have sent out the revised minutes a couple of weeks ago, because that's 5.5 months ago. I don't think anybody remembers. I left what you had sent out because I didn't hear a word from you. But if you have a motion on the table to do that, go ahead. Is it seconded?
I second it, and just to add, I saw the back and forths, and it had Dave saying things that the video showed he didn't say. It was kind of character assassination, which isn't the place. That's not what minutes are for.
That was not what is in there, and they were well done by Allison. So
Mr. Chair,
Allison has nothing to do with this, and she was put in a very difficult position because of
well,
this.
here's your chance. You have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chair,
You
you
can
entered
vote it
things
up or
into
down.
the email that were written in email into minutes that happened at a public meeting. That's just completely unfair
In your
and
opinion.
unethical. It's not.
I think they're fine, but
it's a fact.
we have a motion and it's seconded. Looking for a vote on that? Do we have a, Kathleen?
Can you repeat the motion, please?
The motion
To
would be
accept-
to accept the minutes that I've.
I'm
sent
chairing
over.
this, David, not you.
I'm saying the motion, sir.
Yeah, well,
I understand you're the chair,
okay.
but I was the one who set the original motion. She was looking for clarity. So in regards to the original motion, it was to accept the amended minutes that I've submitted to the full committee for October
No, we're only
18th
dealing
and
right now with September
19th.
19th.
So I'm trying to cover it twice, two in the same motion, but if you want me to do it separately, that's fine. So I will move it September 19th to include the minutes that have been provided to the committee that I've amended.
Okay. Kathy, yes, no?
Yes.
Yes, David?
Yes.
Okay. No. That motion fails 2-3. All right. I would move that we accept the motions as presented by Allison. I'm looking for a motion on that.
I
First,
move that
second.
we accept the.
All right, we're looking for a motion on that. Any discussion? We've
Well,
already had it.
Mr. Chair, in regards to the discussion, I do object to what's been proposed into the minutes. It's my understanding that you have a great deal of influence of what has been included or excluded most parts, for the most part, in the minutes. So, when you attacked me and said I don't have a degree, and you yelled right into my face on NBC News, that's memorialized on a video outside of Canton TV. And if you don't want to put it in the minutes, that's just showing that you're not being a fair person in regards to what should be included and what shouldn't be included.
We have videos of all of these meetings that run 2 to 3 hours for all of the meetings. So anyway, we've got a motion on the table. Kathleen, how do you vote?
No.
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 Jack? Yes. Dan?
Yes.
I vote yes. So the motion passes 3-2. The minutes of... Minutes of what? October 7th, yes. Look for a motion on that. Again, I'd look for a motion on the minutes that Allison sent out to the members. Second? Second?
Just, if I can say one word of discussion. I've never, a committee using minutes to character assassinate people that the chair doesn't like is beyond the pale.
Yeah. Well, it's better than
Kathleen,
Facebook.
if I could just, and I had no intention of saying this, but I will say it now. There was a meeting, and I can't tell you exactly what the date was, that this side of the table was accused of covering for murderers. I never insisted that that be put in the minutes. I just took it as a offhanded compliment and comment, and I never insisted that it be put in the minutes. I don't think that every untoward comment that might be uttered in this room needs to be in the minutes if you take it personally. I took that personally, but I never insisted that it be in the minutes.
Well, there was a lot of insults directed this way, and the fact that someone is insisting that they be included in the minutes is just really unfathomable. So I vote no.
Mr. Chair, and that creates a basis for why some of the responses that were said in certain meetings were said. It's because it started with the leadership of this committee, which was poor and very poor in that September 19th meeting. And that's why, some of the things were said that were said. And to allow, false comments or things that I may have said and not allow the negative stuff that he said is just morally wrong.
Yeah.
And it's sad to see that all the other committee members did not
All right, your vote
feel
on
that
this?
they wanted to have a fair representation of what actually happened.
Your vote
rather
on
than
this?
the
Yes,
one-sided.
no, or abstain?
In regards to the 10-7, no.
No? Jack? Yes? Dan?
Yes.
Yes? I vote yes. The motion carries 3-2. Now we'll go to the minutes of October 18th. Again, I would look for a motion for the minutes as submitted by Allison to the committee.
Suppose we accept the motion.
We accept the motion. Discussion on that?
Again, this has a number of other character assassinations you left out. You called me the meeting of chutzpah in that meeting. You told me I had a terrible business experience, and there was a number of other things that you mentioned that, were demeaning to my character and didn't have anything to do with the merits of what we were discussing. And it's unfortunate that you would allow, not allow the statements you made that were out of order into the minutes.
Kathy, you vote on this? Yes, no?
So I'm voting no.
You're voting no, Kathleen?
There's been a lot of abuse on this committee toward the two petitioner seats, a lot of abuse, every meeting on video. I vote no.
We have, Jack, yes, Dan,
Yes.
yes, I vote yes. The motion carries 3-2. That brings us now to the executive summary of the Canton Police Audit Report by a gentleman from Five Stones.
I think you're missing the public report. Wasn't that on the agenda?
That's the
before?
last one.
Okay, so you amended the
No, I didn't amend
agenda.
it. It's always been the last one, even on the pre-amended one. Got to stay up with it, Dave. We have Mr. Brian McKnight and Matt Germanowski. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here. As you know, we delivered our report on April 1st, 2025. We feel we handed you a very fair and thorough and exhaustive report. We covered the areas as delineated in your scope of work. And we formatted the report to match the scope of work. So as it was reviewed, you could go from one to the other. There are areas of improvement, obviously, within the Canton Police Department, specifically as they relate to crime scene protocols, internal affairs, some training in terms of what's available to the officers. I believe it's section 20 of the report contains all of our recommendations, but these areas I'm highlighting now are probably the most significant of the recommendations. As they relate to the report, I think it's important to note we had full cooperation from the Canton Police Department, from their command staff, from all the officers. When we interviewed the officers as part of Section 6 to cover culture and morale, we had 100% participation, and we were not influenced by anybody in front of us on the audit committee, nor were we influenced or contacted by anybody on the select board. So we were able to operate with complete autonomy in this assessment. And, one thing to note, obviously, after the report has been brought out, regardless of what side of the fence you're on, there are criticisms, and we understand that, and we'll be happy to answer all the questions on Saturday. But very clearly in the scope of work and the request for services, there was, I believe it was paragraph 2 of page 3, it said we want to know what the police department does well, and we want to know what the areas of improvement are. And we felt it was important to highlight both. We didn't go into this with an agenda. We didn't play gotcha with the police department. When we saw an area that deviated from policy and lacked thoroughness, and when we could make recommendations, we made them on the spot. We brought the command staff in and said, look, we found this, and this is against your policy or outside of your policy or doesn't meet what your written policy states. And the reason for that is twofold. One, we do you a disservice if we see something that could be corrected and we don't correct it for 5 months. We just allow it to continue. We do the men and women of your department a disservice if we don't give them the recommendations as we see fit. It doesn't change our recommendation, it doesn't change our finding. Our findings are what they are. So there was nothing that we discovered, brought to the attention of the police department, and then didn't report. Everything that we discovered, we reported as found, and in those areas where the police department made immediate changes, we tried to note that as well. Again, there's a lot of things that do very well, and there's significant areas of improvement, specifically as it relates to crime scenes, the internal affairs process, staffing, training, dispatch, and some of the physical security assessments. So we can go deeper or however you want to do it, folks.
I feel that Saturday you will be talking to the whole community and that this could become a bit redundant, and that certainly I'm going to speak for myself.
So,
That,
yes,
we
sir.
are very happy that we chose your group, that I certainly found it to be a fair, impartial evaluation of the department, and certainly a great blueprint for the town to use for the police department to become better.
Thank you. Saturday, we're prepared to go through the report section by section. We have a PowerPoint, and we'll do just that. We'll talk about each section, what we found, what we recommended, why we feel those recommendations are important, as well as maybe how we can prioritize things or help the town prioritize some of these recommendations. And then we've been asked by the moderator as we prepare for Saturday, we'll answer every single question posed of us. You know, we don't want to get in arguments with people. We're not going to debate people. We understand there's going to be difference of opinions, but we certainly won't shy away from what our findings are and what we put on paper, and we're happy to answer everybody's question.
And I just want to echo Dan's comments that, and again, thank you very much for undertaking this process, and I know it was not an easy thing to do. What you did in administrative process, doing an audit of our police department, it was not a criminal investigation, although Lord knows the two of you have probably got more experience in criminal investigations than most people I know. But just a general question, because again, everybody knows that this is a very divisive issue in our town of Canton, and we all have great hopes that we're going to get beyond it at some point in time, but a lot of the allegations have been centered around this one particular criminal investigation with allegations of corruption, conspiracies, and cover-ups. And I noticed in reading your report, there was a reference to the fact that you found no indication of tampering of evidence on the part of the Canton Police Department. Just as a general comment, did you see any indications of conspiracies, cover-ups, or corruption?
No, and we understand why we've been brought here, and we understand the concerns of the citizens. And if you remember back in November, when we did the interview, I stated to the committee at that time, I have no idea what the report's going to say, because I didn't feel anyone could say that until you went and looked at everything.
Okay.
But what I can say is that we found while we found deviations from policy, none of them were intentional, conspiratorial, or with the intent to manipulate evidence or distort findings for trial purposes.
Well, thank you very much for that. And again, not to beat this into the ground, but coming from gentlemen of your professional background, we very much appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
If I could ask a question, I'm looking at page 9 of the executive summary. Recommendation 3 talks about and it's not the only place in the report that talks about this, that the use of personal phones, cell phones to photograph crime scenes, is a bad practice and needs to be changed. And then you say the use of personal phones should be strictly prohibited. Later in the report, when you talk about self-dispatching, I think you took it to mean, because this is what the report says, that an officer's off duty,
Yep.
something happens.
Yes, ma'am.
And they jump in, which we would all, applaud and be grateful for.
Yes.
But what the citizens were talking about is the use of personal cell phones while on duty, and somebody needs police service, so they call their friend, or they have the personal cell phone, and then that person self-dispatches, while the rest of us, we call the main line, where it says Canton Police line, this line is recorded, we call the main line, main dispatch line, and so some people are getting this private service, and the rest of us are calling it the main line. The use of when you say the use of personal phones should be strictly prohibited,
Yes.
is that just for you in the case of taking photos at crime scenes, or is it also to take in taking service calls from friends who have the person's private cell phone number?
Well, I would say two things to that, ma'am, and thank you for your question. Not everybody uses the main line. There are people in this room that have called the chief directly to report a crime on her personal cell phone. So not everyone calls 911 or the main police line. There are those, like I said, that have called the chief directly and filed a complaint. Personal cell phones for a police officer should never be used. And I think all you have to do is look at the current trial and what has occurred once you cross-pollinate your personal phone with business practices. The Detective Bureau, they're talking to informants, they're talking to witnesses, they're talking to suspects, and they should have a department-issued cell phone for that. And it also provides the town the ability to, when you want to look at that phone, it's your phone. So you can call that phone back, you pay the bills, you see who the calls are, you see the activity on the phone. So it's twofold. I'm not suggesting that the police need to be monitored, but for 30 years I had a government phone. The government could walk in to me at any time and say, I want your phone, and I'm gonna look at who you're talking to. Here you go. It's right there. And it keeps it cleaner for the town. It's a better policy. We understand there's a financial implication to that, and we offered multiple solutions, whether it's the detectives and the command staff have phones, and then maybe a cell phone is in each patrol car. If that's more economically feasible than giving each officer a cell phone. So we understand there's ramifications, but the negative implications of an officer using his personal phone far outweigh any benefit that has.
So you don't have any opinion as to whether calls for police services should go through dispatch beyond the recorded line? Massachusetts has very strong public records laws, open records laws, and that makes it discoverable for people who want to do a public records request. So do you have any opinion on that? Is it okay for officers to be taking calls from like the guys I went to high school with to provide, some police service and self-dispatch when they're on duty? We're talking about on duty.
Understood.
Yeah.
No, and I think we mentioned that in other parts of the report, as it refers to civilian complaints, there should be standards. So if an officer gets that call, provided it's not life or death. If I get a call on my personal phone or work phone and someone's in danger, bodily harm or losing their life, I'm going to respond. If I get a call on my personal phone that says someone hit my garbage can, the practice should be instituted to say, understand, please call the department, call the main line, file a report, and then let's have it dispatched.
So you were saying that that should be the response, call the main recorded line, do the official
Yes.
process? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Right. I would imagine that that's also safer for the town where everything is, on the up and up according to procedure, and it's a recorded line, so.
Yeah, of course, and you want a record of everything.
Exactly.
You want everything to be documented and everything to be consistent.
To protect the town.
Of course.
And also so that, there isn't one group of people doing the regular number and then another group of people getting, VIP service.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, to your point, there, in the report, there was an incident where I think it was the town administrator and one of the select person who called the chief of police directly on an incident that happened in town at a location where there was potentially some underage drinking. And the complainant went to the town administrator and the select person versus calling that incident into the police department and filing the allegation. So we addressed that in the report, and that's a perfect example of how that has to be called into the police department if there's an issue like that. It's a bad business practice for police officers to be answering a personal phone and responding to whatever from somebody that they know. Should be called into the department and acted as deemed appropriate.
And it's all on the record. All right, thank you so much.
Of course.
So may I make a brief comment on that call you just mentioned? I think you note in your report on page 149 that the town administrator, the chief of police, and the select board all acted inappropriately on that. But you mentioned it was underage drinking. The report actually says it was a complaint by a local business owner. So, and that was in November of 2024, who alleged criminal offense involving a select board member.
Yeah, correct. It was right around Thanksgiving time.
In November, probably.
Yes, and that's the exact incident where that should have been the complainant who thought he discovered a criminal offense, underage drinking, which turned out to be not the case. He should have called into the police department, walked in, an officer took the complaint, and then the investigation should have started from there versus going through the town administrator, the select persons involved. Next thing you know, the chief of police is a witness in it, receiving the information. It was completely off base, and we actually had a conversation with the chief about that and the town administrator.
Because I'm sorry. What happens in that instance, so everyone understands what we're talking about, is once that phone call goes to the chief, directly to the chief, and they walk in and hand the chief evidence, she's now a witness. So she's lost, or he's lost that position, that person, they've lost their ability to be impartial and direct any type of investigation because that personal contact directly to the chief has now put the chief in a bad situation. So, and what, in all candor, what we told the chief is when you get that call, say, thank you, I understand. I'm gonna have my guys look into it. I need you to call the main line, file a complaint, speak to the desk sergeant, let my desk sergeant take it. He's gonna take it, hand it to my chief of operations over investigations, and we're gonna act accordingly.
And take the case, and take it the way it should be taken.
So there would have been multiple cases where that happened with that, what I presume to be the same select board member. So did you find
That was the only case
any of that
that we
in your
discovered.
findings? Because there's cases where that member's called, his brother who's a detective. There's cases
Well,
where-
ironically, that
What you're
member,
referencing?
that member wasn't the one that called. So,
Who was the member?
I think it should be spoken at a public meeting.
yeah, we worked very hard to not put names in the report like that, but what I can tell you is the person that made the call was not the gentleman you're thinking.
How do you know who I'm thinking?
Because you said the brother.
Yeah.
Well, it's on the board. There's one of 5 people.
You said his brother's a
You said his brother's a
detective, so I
detective,
took that as a clue and connected the dots.
Okay, just to move on a little bit, you talk about financial constraints and the use of cell phones. And which financial reports did you review?
I don't understand your question.
So you're talking, your report mentions many times how they're financially constrained from, for instance, for doing training,
Yeah.
financially constrained for maybe offering cell phones, financially constrained in maybe cameras, and other capacities you mentioned in here. So
Well, we said
what
there's
is your financial constraint basis based off of?
the fact that they used $383,000 of asset forfeiture money to pay salaries. That's money that can be spent on training. So there's a deficiency right there in just their straight budget to pay the officers to meet minimum requirements as required by the state of Massachusetts.
So within the financial numbers, if you were to look at them, you would see there's a $45,000 allocation every fiscal year for personal office or cell phones. And we've talked about, I'm on the finance committee in this town, so I go through the budgetary process annually.
Sure.
And every year that comes up, so we've talked to the current chief of police about that on our committee. And, you know, what was told about the policy is, hey, officers don't want to have 2 cell phones. We have a policy directed by the leadership that says, hey, we're just going to allow you to use your personal cell phone and we'll stipend you out on it, which was, I believe, maybe a result of collective bargaining. But is the department really financially constrained by issuing cell phones when they're paying for their personal cell phones but not their work cell phone?
I think you're paying $700 a year per officer for cell phones, right? Is that about right?
45,000?
Yeah,
I don't have the breakdown per officer, they
I
don't
think we were
provide us
told
that data.
it's $700 per year for their phone usage, where you can take that money, issue them department-issued phones, and then whatever labor negotiations you get in with the union, then, you know,
So technically, that's not a
between the
financial
union and the town.
constraint
Well,
if it's in the budget.
what we said was, we don't know if that'll be a financial constraint. Our recommendation is they should never use their personal phone. What you have in front of you and what you're referencing is a union issue, which we have no ability to negotiate. The union has that in their contract, or each officer receives a certain amount of money to purchase a phone. So when you say the officers don't want to carry 2 phones, all right, I'm a career lifelong law enforcement officer. I can't make you happy. So you got to act what's in best for the town, and what is in the best interest of the town is for these guys to have a department-issued phone. And if that means you take the stipend away and use that money to purchase a department-issued phone, that's a town decision. So when we talk about financial constraints, they're the type of decisions we don't have the authority to make. What we can say is, this is what you do, this is what we recommend. One way to bridge that is possibly this.
So it's decision-making, and in your report, you referenced that, you know, the chief makes excellent decisions, and probably maybe page 2, if I recall correctly. But in regards to the financial constraints, there's a couple positions she set forward this year: traffic patrol sergeant and a school resource officer. In your report, you note that there's a need for the school resource officer, but you don't note that there's a need for the traffic sergeant. So what has been actually proposed in the actual budget and what got cut? The school resource officer was what was cut in our town budget, and the traffic sergeant was put forward. And you mentioned nothing about a traffic sergeant being needed in this town in any of the findings you found. So that just goes to the direction, are we making the best choices as a community, you know, with our policing? In order, you know, in an effort to take your recommendations seriously, shouldn't we have that school resource officer?
You know, that's a command decision. What we realize and what we know is that you have elementary schools that are unmanned. And that police officer at a school is quite a deterrent. And unfortunately, we both have the experience of having been present and or visiting a school that's been involved in a shooting. It only takes one. And that's unfortunately the times we live in. So I guess that would be a determination for the town to make, is where would I rather place that resource? Your kids are your most precious commodity. So that's just how we view
I
it.
agree with you on that one.
And that's how we made that recommendation.
And then just to move into some of the training, one of the, you noted in your findings, I think in paragraph 20 of the report, that they spent about $100,000 and they used some of that money from the forfeiture overfund. But you didn't mention anything about the Quinn bill. So the Quinn bill is like continuing education here in the Commonwealth, and we're spending $300,000 to $500,000 per year on the Quinn bill on top of that training. So, you know, it seems like some of the officers are probably highly educated, you know, being that they actually have that Quinn bill and that continuing education, which allows for, you know, different degrees. But you know, you continue to go on that they need further training. There's 3 murder cases in this town that you've reported on. Officer John O'Keefe, Sandra Birchmore, and Craig Casey, and not one of them did they take a picture. And you're saying that they need advanced training. That seems like something that would probably be learned in the academy or maybe one of your classes. So that seems more of a basic training that we're not doing, considering that every officer has a cell phone on them. And sometimes maybe takes pictures or sometimes doesn't. We don't really know the answer, but are you saying we need really advanced training when we're not doing the basics?
I don't think we use the word advance. I think the word we used was crime scene preservation. So what you have by law is that an unattended death in the state of Massachusetts has to be relinquished to the authority of the district attorney's office or their designee for investigation. So, again, we're getting the stuff that we're going to talk about Saturday. Canton's never recused from a case, nor should they be. But by law, there's only 3 towns, I believe, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that investigate their own homicides. By law, any unattended death or homicide with suspicious, characteristics goes to the district attorney or his designee. That's usually the Massachusetts State Police. So the section of the law directly after that, and it's in there, then states the Mass State Police will work that case in conjunction with the police department within whose jurisdiction the death occurred. So while the Mass State Police and/or Plymouth County process scenes on a regular basis, because they do it every day, as we saw with the results and the unfortunate incident with Mr. O'Keefe, there's a time delay sometimes before they get there, where the Canton Police Department still has ownership of that crime scene. And what we're saying is that it would benefit the town to have some of your detectives go into a crime scene preservation where you get a scribe and you isolate it and you note, vehicles and people that are coming and going for the ability to maintain some of these crime scenes prior to the state police getting there.
And thank you for those comments. So I just want to put things into perspective. We had a case that involved rubber ducks being put in front of someone's business. And in that report, the officer notes through my training and experience. So say not knocking their training, it seems like they're putting it in a positive light based on the context of it. And they wrote a 38-page or so page report about play money and rubber ducks and took substantial pictures and video evidence. So it seems like they're well trained, but they didn't do that in murder cases where some of their friends or coworkers may have been involved in. Which, well, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but it's...
So what you have, you have 2 different investigations. So the rubber duck investigation that you're referring to was led by, spearheaded, and controlled by the Canton Police Department. There's been a overwhelming thought that every time you have an unattended death, the Canton PD's recused and they should step away. So that has almost become sort of an adopted posture of, well, the Mass State Police are going to do this and we're going to step back. And what we're saying is, no, you should never step back. That unattended death should be handled the same way the rubber duck case, which was handled appropriately.
Exactly.
You should apply those standards to unattended deaths as well.
And then just a couple last comments. In regards to the, you said the DVR had 800 days, which is maybe almost 2.5 years of
As it relates to the
storage
exterior
of
cameras.
videos.
Yes.
And you said that all of the cameras were analog, but in 2019, we had a capital planning request that actually updated some of the cameras to digital at the Canton Police Department. Were you able to see that some of those were digital and some of them weren't digital? There were some of them analog?
I don't know. I remember speaking to the IT gentleman, and that's where we gleaned this information. I know there are cameras in the process of being switched out. The mirrored camera within the Sallyport had not been switched out at that time because there was and rightfully so, there was the current chief, the administration didn't want it to appear like they're trying to alter anything prior to the audit. So when we met with the IT person, we were speaking in terms of the 800 days to the exterior cameras around the building, and that's based on movement. So that's best case scenario on the cloud, no movement. So that can vary.
And did you see how media could have been lost during that time, such as video recordings during certain periods of time. You know, they said there's no ability to edit on the system, but, you know, videos could be downloaded off of there and uploaded into other streaming or editing players. But what happened to the missing part of it? The video that wasn't displayed?
Yeah, so the term missing is misleading to me. So if you're talking about the Sallyport video, is that what you're talking
Or
about?
the part that wasn't recorded, or however?
So it's our understanding those cameras are motion censored. So when motion stops, the camera stops. So when people say missing, it would be like if I say I'm missing a ring from this table. There's an implication that there was a ring here, or that if I say I'm missing a block of gold from this table, there's an implication for the person who hears me say that at one time there was gold here. So when you refer to what was not recorded, I don't refer to it as missing. I refer to it as whether the motion stopped, and it didn't exist. So when the motion in that Sallyport stops, the camera stops recording. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about what we viewed. When we looked at those cameras, we viewed those cameras. We weren't reinvestigating that case. What we did is we looked at the policy, we looked at Sallyport, we looked at the cameras. So you were sort of going down a road where we weren't here to reinvestigate those actions.
And I think the IT person that we spoke with, who's the IT person for the whole town, mentioned that there was, I think 28 in total, inside and out of Canton PD. And my recollection is he stated that a lot of them are still analog, and they're waiting for an upgrade, something to do with building a new school and all this other things with funding. So that's where we left it. Like Mr. Germanowski said, we weren't here to reinvestigate and review all the Sallyport video. We're here to look at specifically, in this case, crime scene incidents, reviewing police reports and how it lined up with Canton PD policy and procedure.
And then in regards to those policies and procedures, you mentioned, I think about 38 times that in your report that they should have done something. So when you mentioned they should have, does that mean the policy was not followed in those cases under some of your recommendations?
You'd have to give me a specific instance, but
They should have taken a picture of the decedent.
Well, yes.
Okay, so that would, okay.
Well, like for an example, the Casey incident, it was a car accident. The vehicle went into the tree at 672 Pleasant Street on Christmas Eve morning in 2018. They responded to the scene. They thought the operator had fled. They didn't take pictures of the vehicle. They got called back around 7 a.m. when a neighbor noticed a body on the front lawn at 676 Pleasant Street. They went back. They didn't take photos of the deceased, Mr. Casey. State police came in. They took over the investigation. They did a very thorough job on the accident investigation, very detailed. But again, in the policy and procedure, you respond to a crime scene, you're supposed to digitally photograph. If you can't digitally photograph, use your laptop computer in your car. If not, at a last resort, you can use your personal cell phone, none of which happened at that scene, and it's documented. So I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah, there were instances where they didn't follow policy and procedure, but there were cases where they did a great job and they responded to crime scenes and they hit every number. They took digital photographs, they took witness statements on the scene, they did really thorough reports. And, by and large, you get a really good police department. You get some really good detectives, you have a young police force. You probably have about 37 to 38% of the force is less than 5 years in the job. And they're very happy that they're here. They all don't live in the town of Canton. About 50% of your officers live outside of Canton. They didn't grow up in Canton. A lot of them do, but that's everywhere in America. It's not a bad thing to be from a town or a city that you police in, because you know the people. It's like a community policing thing. So
and that's really what you want. And then just the last thing, Mr. Clow, is, and I think it's important to note, like, we're talking about 3 very significant cases, right, where there's a loss of life. Brian and I have worked in cities where you would have 3 homicides before lunch. The town of Canton is a pretty awesome place, and it's just, police departments become good at what they do on a regular basis. Unfortunately, you don't see murders in your town on a regular basis. So what we're saying is to bridge that gap, because we know they're going to be investigated by the state police, get some crime scene training for some detectives, and you can alleviate some of these issues. But I really think these issues result from the fact that they just don't do it every day, more so than any kind of intentional or gross negligence. You know, we can tell you this, while we were there, I mean, seven or eight people, while we were in the department, they saved the life of 7 or 8 people, you know? And these are people with drug problems. Maybe they had to hit them with Narcan, or they rushed them to the hospital. But really significant, heroic acts that these guys take. And they're good at it because they see that more. So it's like anything else. The more you do of one particular thing, the better you are at it. So these recommendations address these issues that we feel will exist while you have the potential for unintended death, you know, in that process of handing it over to the state police.
And then the last thing I had was the uncollectible balance for the detail fund. So it just seems like some of the vendors are just pointing fingers. It's not me, it's them, especially some of the subcontractors for the big utility companies.
Yeah.
So where does that balance currently stand? And, you know, you didn't really outline enough in there to like onboard a vendor to really to see who's accountable for that payment, to stop that finger pointing.
Well, what I would tell you is this, is if you look at our recommendation, your chief of police and or police force should never collect money from a citizen. That is putting them in a
Finance department, yes, so.
Yeah,
it's
so they're there like protect and serve. They provide a service. So they have a very thorough method, and it's within the department, as it should be, for hiring details as they relate to construction, maybe traffic accidents, you know, tree service, those kind of things. They come in at all times of the day. We've been in the department at 7:30 in the morning, and they're getting calls for details. So for those calls to go somewhere else that has 9 to 5 hours does a disservice to the community. So the community, 24 hours a day, can contact the police department and order a detail. The time frame you asked us to look at, I believe they did $5.3 million worth of detail work. The uncollectible balance at that time was $91,000, or just roughly 1.3%, which means the police department has a collectible rate on what was billable at 98, a little over 98%, which is pretty good. I'm not a businessman, but it sounds good. Yeah. So while we were there, those $91,000, I believe, are somewhere around 13 to 17. I don't know the exact
Okay,
number.
that sounds good. They're making progress. You know, I don't think we knew about the
Yeah.
top number that you described.
Yes, sir.
Break it down into percent, so
100%.
that was helpful.
And we reviewed their process. So they had made, it's a very fine line for your police department, because they're sending emails, some monthly, sometimes twice a month, saying, hey, you still owe this balance. But there's a fine line where it just visually, to have your chief of police or your deputy chief or lieutenant knocking on anybody's door saying, you owe us money and we're not going to give you any more service until you pay this, visually looking in, that's a really bad optic. So our recommendation is, once they perform the service and once they perform that detail, they invoice it, they report the hours to the Department of Finance, copy the Department of Finance on the billing, and on the bill, they instruct that vendor, remit your payment to the Department of Finance, Town of Canton, or their designee, and they should step back.
Okay, thank you very much for bearing with me and answering those questions. I appreciate you, Mr. McKnight and Mr. Germanowski. And looks like there's obviously a few things that could be improved, and sets forward a path for, you know, some of the town officials to work on over the next fiscal year, if not sooner. So,
Of course.
thank you for your time.
Of course, thank you.
I have one other
If I
question.
could?
Of course.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have one other question. So, talking about internal affairs investigations or investigating of complaints filed by residents,
Yes.
you talk about the lack of organization and consistency in the files and the investigative efforts.
Yes.
And two questions about this. You said you found some complaints filed by residents were handled directly by the chief of police, creating a conflict. Can you, first question of two, can you explain for us, for the residents,
Sure.
how that is a conflict of interest for the chief of police to handle that? You suggest that it should be the deputy chief of operations and investigations.
Right, so the chief is your final adjudicator, so they are gonna make the final determination on sustaining a charge or not sustaining a charge. They're also gonna issue discipline. So in that capacity, they shouldn't be a part of the investigation. They're almost like a judge being an investigator. They're two separate roles. So, and we told Chief Rafferty this directly because she was trying very hard to appease everybody that called her. So what we had said was much like we were talking about before. When you answer your phone, someone says, "Chief, I've got a complaint," and we'll just say, "Officer McKnight, yelled at me at Shaw's parking lot. Thank you, I hear you. I'm gonna look into this. I'm gonna ask you call my desk sergeant, and he will provide you with a civilian complaint. You're welcome to come in, fill it out. We will email you one, but please, by all means, file this complaint." And then when that, now we have a record, right, Ms. Holly? So, and it's a standard process, because as the chief, you're gonna conflict me out of my responsibility of making a decision. And the chief doesn't wanna do that, so, and they shouldn't wanna do that. So when that complaint comes in, thank you for the complaint, we're gonna look at it, please call my desk sergeant. He'll provide you with a complaint form, you're welcome to come in, we'll email it to you, but file the complaint. That complaint then should go to the deputy chief of operations, who sees the investigative division, and then should be delegated appropriately. So if the complaint is against an officer, I'm gonna come down to one of my detective sergeants and say, "Look, go conduct this internal affairs investigation." If it's against a sergeant, I'm gonna go to one of my senior lieutenants, and I'm gonna say, "Go conduct this internal affairs investigation." There has to be an acknowledgement that, and we're getting into more of the stuff for Saturday, recusal's not integrity. So just because I know somebody and I say, "Well, I'm gonna recuse myself," that's not integrity. Integrity is saying, "Look, I know you, and unfortunately, I'm gonna suspend you." And we both have had to do that in our prior position within DEA. Where guys we worked with for a decade, they're sitting in front of us, and I say, "Look, I love you with all my heart, but I'm gonna suspend you right now for 7 days because this was wrong." And it's not meant to be punitive. The disciplinary process is meant to be corrective. So an established pattern is very important, and the chief is the final decision maker with approval, I think, with the town bylaws and the select board in issuing the discipline. So when you're the person that issues the discipline, you don't want to be a part of the investigation. So every investigation should be handled in that fashion. It should come up to the deputy chief, be delegated appropriately for investigative concurrence, right? Exhaustive investigative. And then when the deputy chief of operations gets that investigation, he checks it for thoroughness, and then it should go across to the deputy chief of administration. Now, she gets it, she's not a part of the investigation. She assesses what policies, if any, were violated. So in this instance, Mr. McKnight, that gets kicked down. Sergeant goes, "Hey, Brian, were you on the job?" "Yeah." "Were you at Shaw's?" "Yeah." "Did you interact with Mr. Jaronowski?" "Yeah." Go, I look at the body camera, I see the interaction, "Yeah, that's unprofessional." I come back, I get a statement from Officer McKnight that goes in the report, goes across. Deputy Chief of Administration says, "Yeah, that's a violation of policy right there. You can't tell somebody to, go pound sand." They outline that policy violation, then that entire package should go to the Chief of Police. Now they have all the facts. I have the complaint, I have the allegation, I have the investigation, I have the violation of policy. And then the chief, at that point, has the ability to issue the correct amount of discipline to that officer that's going to correct their behavior.
Okay, thank you for that answer. My second question, you described, you examined 75 internal affairs investigations over 20 years. So,
Yes.
so it's not an everyday affair, but neither is it uncommon. So
Right.
it does happen.
Of course.
And you recommend greater consistency process for the investigative files and the investigative efforts. In describing these improvements,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering what accountability is there in a small town?
Right.
I mean, you guys will go back to, wherever you're going, and what kind of accountability is it in this town to know that if a resident had a complaint, that it would be handled using the best practices that you describe?
Well, this system, the way we've described it, and this was probably one of the first things we came across, and we brought it right to the chief's attention and said this needs to be addressed. Again, it doesn't stop our findings, it doesn't affect our report, it goes back to what we were talking about integrity. Like, I can tell you there's a problem, it doesn't mean I'm not gonna document there's a problem. So, the way the system would work is when that civilian files a complaint and the desk sergeant takes it, it gets a complaint number right there, 2025-043. I make a copy of it, I give you your complaint number. Now you have proof that you filed a complaint and you have a reference number. That makes its way up to the deputy chief. Now, let's use my scenario where I say Mr. McKnight was rude to me at Shaw's. It goes up to the deputy chief, and he reads it, and Mr. McKnight's on vacation. He's not even in the state. So now we got an issue. You know, so maybe the deputy chief calls the dispatch. We haven't had anybody at Shaw's. They have the option to close that complaint right there because at face value, it's sort of unfounded. However, hey, McKnight was working, McKnight was at Shaw's, there seemed to be an interaction. He takes that complaint number, 2025-01, and he says now it's 2025-01 IA-01. So now it's now it's civilian complaint 1, internal affairs 1. And then that gets delegated down. Well, if they do this sort of method with this documentation, at the end of the year, it's very easy for the town select board to say, how many civilian complaints did you have? 47, because they're logged, right? I have now a log of every civilian complaint that comes in, it receives a number, and in theory, there should be 47 residents that all have that, I was civilian complaint 24, I was civilian complaint 41. Out of the 47 civilian complaints, 23 became internal affairs cases. And again, with this method, there should be a complaint containing an allegation, an initiation of an investigation for an internal affairs case with a number that matches the complaint number, with a letter adjudicating the case, be it a clearance, a counseling, a suspension, however it is. So at the end of the year, these are Brian had to turn these over to, we work together with DEA in this capacity. But the Inspector General of the Department of Justice would ask us that, and you have, it's right at your fingertips now. Assuming you adopt this, which the chief has, you adopt this policy. And I can say that the chief has, because while we were there, complaints have come in, and they did not take them to outside agencies, and they implemented this strategy. It was much more efficient, and it was a greater service to the town, and it was a greater service to the officer. Sometimes an internal affairs investigation is exactly what's needed to help the officer prove or clear them. There's not always a negative implication to this. And we talk about that in the report in terms of documenting negatives. Sometimes there's a complaint and you have to go through the process just to document it. It doesn't mean it's going to result in the disciplinary action.
Okay, so it sounds like the select board, and the way Canton is set up, the select board, the police chief reports to the select board. It sounds like the select board is the quality control for this? Is that?
For the disciplinary process?
Yeah, so that this is handled as you described, that it's not, the chief of police doing the investigation, that the files are, maintained, that citizens who make a complaint are able to get a report with a report number, that, the whole process you described.
Yes, ma'am. It's my understanding the chief reports to the town manager, and the town manager reports to the select board.
Yes.
Town administrator reports to the select board, but of course, the town select board at any time could ask for this information. And if it's done in this fashion, that email can be returned with the correct statistics just as fast as it's received.
Okay. And I'm sorry, this really is my last question.
That's okay.
It was a 206-page report, and I tried to, I'm just trying to remember what you said about body cams. Can you address that? And I'm sorry that I can't cite it.
That's okay. In regarding, I think they're a great thing.
Yeah. Were there any recommendations regarding body cams for the police
I
officers?
think you did that one.
Yeah, I think they implemented the body-worn cameras in November. They have a lieutenant that oversees the body-worn camera program, and all indications are it's working very well. The officers have really good policy and procedure, what they're supposed to do when they turn them on, when they turn them off. So I would say it's in the infancy stage right now, but they're working properly, and they're all adhering to the policy and procedure that is put in place.
And most officers welcome that. They want that camera. And I think that's a good sign for everyone to consider, is that when you have an officer that wants that camera on, it's because they have nothing to hide. And that really offers them a form of protection as well.
Is this, like we had a trial program under the past chief, is this still in a trial, is this a trial program, or is this
No,
now, this is?
It's implemented.
All officers
Yes, ma'am.
on duty are wearing, okay, that's great.
Yes, ma'am.
That's great to know, thank you.
Yeah, of
They're
course.
doing a really good job. On one of the crime scenes, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where it was an unattended death. The autopsy report isn't back yet, but, the officers that were on scene did a perfect job on I think it's written in the report. One of the officers turned his body worn camera on and got a really good statement from the person who found the person who was deceased. So they are working, and it's a great tool. I mean,
It's a great benefit to the town.
All right, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
If I could, I'll try to make this the last question, but you brought up a lot of opportunities for improvement in several areas. The select board and other people are gonna have to take your report and look it over. A lot of it's gonna come down to money, but irregardless of what it may cost for something, do you have a favorite top 3 out of your list that you think should have a priority and be done?
I don't wanna
That's putting
speak-
you on the spot, but
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Brian. For me, I mean, it's tough. Crime scene preservation, I think, you do a disservice having these detectives go out there without a little bit of that knowledge. I think that's beneficial. I believe the safety issues regarding the physical security of the police department, when you look at best standards in some of the departments around here, that lot needs to be fenced in with privacy slats, and you have a lot of money back there in terms of equipment, weapons in some of these cars. There's a lot of tools in these cars and a lot of money, and I think that's important to do that, and training. I think there's a difference between qualification or certification and training. And sometimes people think, well, these officers are qualified or they've certified. That falls very far short of training. And you could go back to crime scene. So you graduate the academy, you're certified to handle a crime scene, but are you really trained to handle that crime scene? So I think these guys want more training. And when we spoke to them about training, none of them are crazy. Like they want training that really relates to the things that they do every day. So if I had to give you 3, it would be probably training and the physical security and the phones. They would be my top 3.
thank you.
yeah, I agree, yes.
Same?
Agree, yes. And try to get their TO back to where it should be. I think they're still down a few police officers. And I think another recommendation would, raise the TO by 2 or 3 officers so that it's comparable to the other small towns in the area. But
Yeah.
yes, those 3, and, maybe raise the TO to have more officers on the street. I think you have minimum manning, the day shift, the mid shift, 4 to midnight, and the overnight shift. Could probably add at least 1 more officer on the overnight shift so that it balances out all 3 shifts. I think that they're -1 on the midnight to 8 shift. So I think that would be important where you have, and also dispatchers. I think you need some administrative assistance in the police department. You don't have 1 full-time employee, you have a part-time person who's who handles the police details and payroll and stuff like that. I think you need to hire some dispatchers or go to a regional dispatcher. I think it's a good thing. You don't lose that police officer who's always going to man the desk, 24/7. You need somebody in that police department, but I think you need some other help, dispatchers and maybe intel analysts to take the load off of the detective division. You have 3 detectives and a detective sergeant. Coming out of the government and knowing the big cities that we worked in, most of the departments have intel analyst support that can take information from a detective, run down certain things, whether it's phone data, phone pings, which will tell you where a phone is at all times, and they can do that kind of help. But I think definitely some administrative support for the department.
A good example of that is you have one sergeant that's both the police prosecutor and the sergeant of detectives. That's two really full-time jobs, and he does them well. If you had an administrative assistant to help him do some of his clerical duties, that really frees him up to be a police officer, if that makes sense. I guess the analogy is if you have a quarterback, you want that guy running the ball or throwing the ball, not filling up water bottles. Not that that's demeaning in any way. You want these guys to do what they've been paid to do and what you expect them to do. And one half position for an administrative assistant, that puts a lot of that clerical administrative load on the police officers, where if you can't increase the TO with the police officer salary, you could get young interns out of college. You could get young intel analysts, some young administrative assistants that want to get in this line of work. That could maybe free up the officers to then go ahead and pick get additional shifts on the street.
And it's completely in line with some of the other small departments in the area. Most of the departments have dispatchers. We interviewed the
Is
Westwood.
regional dispatch or in-house
In-house, like
dispatch the best practice?
Like the town of Westwood. We met with that Chief Silver. Really good guy, really. He sat with us for 3 hours, and he says 2 dispatchers on every shift. It's like another tool in the toolbox for the department. When you have walk-ins, they can do things that frees up the police officer that's on the desk. It's answering a 911 call, or running something to see if somebody's wanted or something like that, outstanding warrants. But it's best practices. It's something that I think the town needs, and I think we spoke to the chief about it. It might be a union issue where it might be part of a labor negotiation, but it's in line with best practices, and that's one of the things in the scope of work. Give us some best practices that we can make recommendations as one of them.
There's benefits to regional dispatch too, Mr. Clow. I mean, one of the things we've learned from regional dispatch is they then assume responsibility for radio maintenance. So there's a part of the report talks about equipment. There are blind spots in the town regarding radio coverage that not just puts the officer at a risk, but the town. When that officer's out of his car, put aside an arrest situation, if they're just out rendering aid, maybe someone's having a heart attack, and they have no radio communication. So now I've got to leave this person. Maybe I'm doing CPR, and I can't leave this person. So now I got to count on someone seeing me to call in for help. Where if these radios are corrected, I can now in my body unit, I can request an ambulance, I can request a paramedic. So there's options in there, whether it's full-time dispatchers hired by the department or regional dispatches. There are pros and cons to both.
Thank you. You gentlemen have any other questions? We've only had one so far.
No.
No?
No, and again, on behalf of the citizens of the town of Canton and the board, thank you for your diligence and your attention and your recommendations. Thank you.
This will be kind of a preview for Saturday with, from 2 to 5, where you'll give your full presentation at that point with the slides and so forth, and then the question and answer.
Happy to answer any
I
questions you have.
appreciate your forthrightness and openness and the report itself. I think
Thank
you
you.
did a
Thank you, everybody
fantastic
on the
job.
committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could move on to the last item on the agenda, which is to discuss and vote on the final report as required by Article 6 of the special town meeting of November 20th, 2023. Allison, could you put up on the screen the special town meeting, Article 6, the language of that?
Okay.
What we ha-
It's just Article 6, the one with the list.
No, just first that and then the list. All right, that's what we have to meet. The procurement committee shall provide a public report on the process and outcome of the procurement when completed. Now, if you put up the other list, this is a list that was, I won't say I developed, I cleaned it up. This basically was a list from Mr. Scollins on an email to Dave here back in November when he had asked a similar question. I cleaned up the bottom of it, just the report coming in, and the final report will speak for itself. It's not a public police audit committee to politicize what a neutral party found. The goal of this endeavor was an independent audit report, and a Five-Stone Intelligence has delivered this to us. Now, David also has a report that he brought in, but I understand there are no copies. He has it all. I think it's an 11-page report that he wants to implement instead of having a one-page. It's 11 or 12 pages, and it's going over details, but a lot of it is on the minutes we just voted, is contradicting what we just voted, from pages 8 to 6 and on. The other thing I'm a little surprised at, David, some of it I noticed in there are emails that I had that I think you got from a FOIA request that you had on me back months ago.
No.
Well,
No, that's
it sure looked like it anyway. The other thing I was a little bit surprised
to
at is the fact that in there, you mention your name 35 times in 12 pages. I thought you must be running for an office or something, but maybe you're setting it up for next year. Anyway, that's immaterial. Nobody has a chance to look at the difference between the two.
Well, I emailed it to you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and they have it, but
Send it
you
to the
didn't bring
committee?
copies for anybody else, so and it's not going to be able to go up on the board, so we can't look at it that way. I would look for a motion right now.
Ms. Neff, at the moment, I could just get on my phone and
No,
forward it
that's
to
all
her
right.
if you want to bring it on the board.
I think
But,
I don't think we have to
Mr.
do that
Chair,
at this point.
If I may, the report that Mr. Scollins provided, a dozen or so bullet points, isn't really a report. Mr. Scollins wasn't really involved in the process. He actually said he wasn't involved at many public meetings. You know, I think he might have attended one and had to leave halfway through. But, you know, for instance, this doesn't even show how you just wrote, the committee was formed. There was a
It doesn't
specific
matter.
process on how that committee was formed and how, you know, you were able to hand select two people and myself and Kathleen had to be voted in by 300 people who signed the original petition.
But that was what
and
the
there's-
petition is put on the ballot.
So-
That's what you wanted, not us.
So it goes on to describe what happens behind the scenes. This is the process of how this committee has worked back and forth for the past almost year now. And this, you're missing a lot of vital information in here.
We have 7 hours of video, roughly 3 hours each meeting. We have minutes from 7 meetings. All of that is in there.
Again, there's probably about 500 emails back and forth that none of that was public. And a lot of that needs to be out in public. And
Why does it have to be in public?
whether you want to make this a 3-2 vote or not, I would still issue this as a dissenting report for the committee because committee members have the ability to issue a dissenting report.
That's up to you. I would
So-
look for a motion on the one page to vote that.
Motion to table Mr. McCarthy's report.
Second.
Oh, we're going to ask to table, so we have those looking to table the report. Kathleen, how are you
Second it.
voting?
To table the report?
Yes.
Aye.
Yeah, aye?
I'm sorry, correction. Motion to table Mr. McCarthy's bulleted list is the correct motion.
Semantics. David, yes or no?
It's not a report, sir.
It is. Yes or no?
I'm voting motion to table it, yes.
Table? No? No. We're not, so that would be
No.
1, 2, 3. 3 against, 2 in favor, so that motion fails. I'd look for a motion to pass.
Well, let's continue.
I have the floor right now, and don't interrupt me.
You don't need to
I'm the
talk to
chair.
me like that.
Oh, yes,
okay?
I do,
No,
because you keep
don't.
interrupting me.
That's very inappropriate.
No, it
sir.
isn't, not when you keep interrupting me.
I'm
So I'm
not
looking for a
interrupting.
motion to,
Motion to accept the report as presented
we have a
above.
second on that?
We have a discussion.
So we have a first, the second on that. We have a vote on that.
We have a discussion before you have a vote.
Well,
in
you just had
Robert's
the
rules.
discussion.
And that was part of what's in my report was how Robert's rules was supposed to be part of the committee. You left that off of the report, Bob. The vote for the chairman that the town administrator specifically said was wrong and should have been redone, you left that off of the report. There's another number of other things, how you were inappropriately going through the town administrator to get town council. You didn't have the town council request form on file.
I've
No
never
one in the
I've
committee
never
did.
talked to the town council directly, ever.
Then how did you get the answers to the
I
scope
went
of
through
services?
Mr. Collins or with
It wasn't
Charlie.
through Mr. Collins, it was Mr. Scollins. It was through Charlie Duty, who was supposed to be
Well,
hands-off of this
he talked
committee.
to him,
So
but I never
this
did.
is what happened. You involved the town administrator,
We have
who was
discussed-
pointed out in the
David.
report as acting inappropriately, actually acted inappropriately behind the scenes in this committee.
No,
And
that's incorrect.
He actually
And that-
told me to cease and desist.
Yeah, for
from
what you said, he
talking
should
to
have
him
said to cease and
Because I
desist.
told him to
Both
recuse
of you,
himself for
can
having
we
a
go?
family
This has
member
been discussed.
involved in
Can we take a vote?
Yes.
the case.
We have,
So-
we have a motion on the table. Kathleen, how are you voting on that?
So we're still having a discussion, and
No,
I
I'm
have
closing discussion.
the floor,
No,
so.
you've inappropriately kept on. We have a motion on the floor.
Excuse me, sir.
Oh, no, you excuse
You
me.
don't have
We
to
have a
talk to
motion
me
on the
like
floor.
this.
Oh, yes, I
You're
do.
being very rude.
Kathleen, are you going to vote yes, no, or abstaining?
And
Said no.
No? David,
it
yes,
it
no?
goes
or-
on to say how you
David,
invited
yes, no, or
other
abstaining?
bidders outside of a committee vote, Bob. You were inviting people behind the scenes that
Jack,
weren't even
Dan?
voted by the committee, Bob. That's
Yes
not
to that.
right, Bob. That's unethical.
3-1-1.
And then you
Motion,
told me I
motion,
couldn't.
motion
I have
passes.
to vote, sir. I haven't even voted
Well,
yet.
you just abstained because you
I
wouldn't give me the
didn't-
vote.
You can't vote for me. You can't abstain
You
me.
abstained.
I'm voting no, Bob.
Oh, okay, so 3-2, motion passes.
And I
At that
am-
point, I would look for a motion to adjourn, sine die.
And I
Second,
Motion
all
to
those in
adjourn.
favor?
submit a
Kathleen,
report to the record,
motion
which
to
doesn't need a
adjourn.
motion. Minorities have opinions on committees, and I'm
Aye.
respectfully submitting
Aye.
the dissenting report, and
Kathleen, did
I
you
will
say aye?
provide you a digital copy of that as well.
Kathleen, did you say aye on adjournment?
Yes.
David, adjournment, aye or no?
And I hope that can be posted
David?
on the website along with the town's report to see what actually happened in this
David,
committee.
yes or no on
And
adjournment?
how this gentleman, who was not
Yes,
a gentleman.
yes or no on adjournment, David?
You
David?
can vote for me again, Bob.
Oh, no, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to listen to you. Yes or no? He's abstaining, so 3-1-1. We are adjourned, sine die. This should conclude the Police Audit Committee meetings forthwith. We're done.
This and that will both be attached to the end of the minutes for tonight.
As chairman, I'd like to see that before it goes anywhere.
We've already seen it, sir.